Did you ever meet someone at the worst possible time in your life and wonder if fate was playing a cruel joke on you? She sat in the dimmed glow of a coffee shop on a Tuesday afternoon. Rain streaking down the windows like tears. She refused to cry anymore. Her phone buzzed with another message from her ex, the third one that week, begging for another chance. She didn't read it. Instead, she stared at the untouched latte going cold between her hands, wondering how she'd become the kind of person who said yes to things she didn't want, to people who didn't deserve her. That's when he walked in, not with fanfare or some Hollywood meet-cute moment. Just a guy shaking rain from his jacket, scanning the room for an empty seat. Their eyes met for half a second, brief, accidental. The kind of glance you forget before you even process it. He found a table near the window. She went back to pretending her coffee was interesting, but something shifted in the air that day. Something small and imperceptible, like the first crack in ice before it shatters. His name was Daniel. She wouldn't learn that for another 3 weeks, not until the universe conspired to put them in the same coffee shop again. Same day, same time, as if they were both caught in some invisible routine neither had planned. This time, he smiled, a genuine one, the kind that reaches the eyes and makes you wonder what someone finds so amusing about the rain. She smiled back. That was her first mistake, or maybe her first stroke of luck. It's hard to tell the difference when you're standing at the beginning of something. They started talking the way strangers do when they've seen each other enough times to feel like maybe they're not strangers anymore. Coffee turned into conversations. Conversations turned into walks through the city as autumn painted the trees in shades of amber and rust. He told her about his recent breakup, how he'd spent 6 months healing, learning to be alone. She told him about hers, though she left out the part where she still felt like a hollowed-out version of herself. It felt easy with him, too easy, and that terrified her, because here's what she knew. Guys like Daniel, fresh out of relationships, weren't looking for forever. They were looking for distraction, for validation, for someone to remind them they were still desirable while they patched up the holes in their hearts. She'd seen it before: friends who'd become placeholders, warmth on cold nights, transition girls between the last love and the next real one. She knew the pattern. She could see it playing out before it even happened. So when he kissed her for the first time under the awning of a closed bookstore while the rain poured down around them, she kissed him back but kept a piece of herself locked away. When he asked to see her again, she said yes but reminded herself this wasn't real. When he started calling her just to hear her voice, she answered but told herself he'd be gone by winter. She became an expert at enjoying the moment while preparing for the ending. November came in cold and gray. They spent weekends tangled in blankets, watching old movies and sharing stories from childhoods that somehow felt similar despite being lived in different cities. He introduced her to his sister. She introduced him to her best friend. They carved pumpkins and argued playfully about whether horror movies or comedies were better for Halloween night. It felt like a relationship. It looked like a relationship, but she couldn't let herself believe it was one. "You're guarding your heart," her best friend told her over wine one night. "I can see it. You're holding back." "I'm being smart," she corrected. "He just got out of something serious. I'm the rebound. That's all this is." "Did he tell you that?" "He doesn't have to." But doubt crept in through the cracks. Because Daniel didn't act like someone looking for a distraction. He remembered the small things: how she took her coffee, that she hated surprises but loved spontaneous adventures, that she went quiet when she was upset instead of loud. He asked about her day and actually listened. He made plans weeks in advance, including her in a future she'd convinced herself they didn't have. One night in early December, snowflakes just beginning to fall, they sat in his car outside her apartment. The heater hummed softly. Christmas lights twinkled from nearby windows, casting colored shadows across his face. "I need to tell you something," he said, and her stomach dropped. Here it comes, she thought the speech. "You're amazing, but ... double quotes, the confirmation of everything she'd been protecting herself against. "I know you think this is temporary," he continued, his voice steady but soft. "I can feel it. The way you pull back sometimes, like you're waiting for me to disappear." She couldn't look at him. She focused on a spot on the dashboard, her throat tight. "I need you to know that's not what this is. Not for me." He paused, and in that silence, the whole world seemed to hold its breath. "I didn't plan this. I didn't think I was ready. But somewhere between coffee and right now, you stopped being a maybe and became my everything." Her eyes burned. She blinked hard against the tears trying to form. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "Unless you want me to, but I need you to stop waiting for me to leave." She finally looked at him then. Really looked at him, and saw something she'd been too afraid to acknowledge. This wasn't the face of someone passing time. This was someone who'd found home in an unexpected place and decided to stay. "How do you know?" she whispered. "How do you know this is real and not just leftover feelings from before?" He smiled, that same genuine smile from the coffee shop, but deeper now, weighted with certainty. "Because when I was with her, I was always trying to be enough. With you, I already am." The words hung between them like snowflakes suspended in streetlight, beautiful and fragile and impossibly true. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. But years of disappointment had taught her that wanting something doesn't make it real, and hope is just another word for setting yourself up for heartbreak. She'd built walls for good reasons, and tearing them down meant risking everything she'd carefully protected. Could she really trust this, trust him? Trust herself not to be wrong about what she was feeling? The snow fell harder now, covering the windshield in white, cocooning them in their own small world where decisions felt both impossible and urgent. Retry TM. She reached for his hand in the darkness of that snow-covered car, her fingers trembling slightly as they intertwined with his. It wasn't an answer, not yet, but it was a beginning, a crack in the armor she'd so carefully constructed. "I'm scared," she admitted, and those two words cost her more than any declaration of love ever could. "I know," he said simply, and squeezed her hand. "Me too." That honesty became their foundation. Not grand promises or sweeping gestures, but the quiet truth that they were both terrified of getting this wrong, of hurting each other, of becoming another story people tell about timing and mistakes and almost lovers who couldn't make it work. Christmas came soft and slow. He met her parents, sat at their dinner table, and laughed at her father's terrible jokes in a way that felt genuine rather than performative. Her mother pulled her aside while doing dishes, soap bubbles clinging to her hands, and said, "This one's different. I can see it in the way he looks at you like you're the room he's been trying to find his way to." She wanted to argue, to list all the reasons this couldn't be what it seemed, but the words died in her throat because some part of her, the part she'd been trying to silence, whispered that maybe her mother was right. They rang in the new year on his apartment rooftop, the city spread out below them in a constellation of lights and possibilities. When midnight struck and fireworks painted the sky in bursts of gold and silver, he kissed her like it meant something, like it meant everything. "This is our year," he said against her lips. And for the first time, she let herself believe it might be. January brought a cold snap that froze the city in crystalline beauty. They spent evenings cooking together in his cramped kitchen, him chopping vegetables while she stirred sauces, moving around each other with an ease that felt practiced despite being new. He taught her to make his grandmother's pasta recipe. She showed him how to fold dumplings the way her aunt had taught her as a child. These were the small intimacies she'd been afraid to acknowledge, the building blocks of a life shared rather than borrowed. But fear has a way of resurfacing when you least expect it. It happened on a February afternoon, gray and unremarkable. She was at his place, curled up on the couch with a book, when his phone buzzed on the coffee table. She wasn't trying to snoop. The notification just appeared, impossible to miss. A name she recognized. His ex. "I've been thinking about us. Can we talk?" Her chest tightened. The book slipped from her hands. Every insecurity she'd been slowly dismantling came rushing back like a flood breaking through a dam. This was it. The moment she'd been waiting for. The real relationship calling to reclaim what was rightfully hers. Daniel emerged from the bedroom, towel drying his hair, and immediately noticed the change in her expression. "What's wrong?" She nodded toward the phone, unable to speak. He picked it up, read the message, and his jaw tightened. But not with longing or confusion, with something that looked like frustration mixed with resignation. "This isn't what you think," he said. "Then what is it?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. He sat beside her, close enough that she could smell his shampoo, far enough that she didn't feel trapped. "She's been texting every few weeks since November. I haven't responded because there's nothing to say. What we had is over. It was over before I ever walked into that coffee shop. But she wants you back. What she wants doesn't matter. I'm not hers anymore." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'm yours if you'll have me." She wanted to believe him. But old wounds don't heal in straight lines, and trust isn't built in a single conversation, no matter how sincere. "How do I know I'm not just ... convenient?" The question tasted bitter. "How do I know that if she'd reached out sooner you wouldn't have gone back?" The hurt that flashed across his face was immediate and genuine. He set the phone down, screen facing the table, and turned to face her fully. "You want to know why I didn't go back? Why I won't go back?" His voice was quiet but firm, because being with her felt like wearing shoes that almost fit. Close enough that you convince yourself they're comfortable, but they're always just slightly wrong. "I spent 2 years adjusting my stride, ignoring the blisters, telling myself this was as good as it gets." He reached for her hand, and this time she let him take it. "Then I met you, and it was like finding shoes that were made for my feet. Not perfect, nothing's perfect, but right, easy. Like I could walk forever and never feel the ache." Tears blurred her vision. "That's a terrible metaphor." He laughed, soft and sad. "I know, but it's true." She wiped at her eyes, frustrated with herself for crying, for caring this much, for being vulnerable enough to get hurt. "I need you to do something," she said finally. "Anything. Respond to her now while I'm here. Tell her you've moved on." He didn't hesitate. Picked up the phone and typed quickly. Showed her the screen before sending. "I've moved on. I'm with someone who makes me happy. Please respect that and stop reaching out." He hit send and then, without ceremony, blocked the number. "Done," he said. Should have done it months ago. The relief that washed over her was immediate and overwhelming. But it was more than just the text. It was the way he'd handled it. No drama. No keeping options open. No let me down easy response that left room for interpretation. Just clear, definitive closure. I'm sorry, she whispered, for doubting you. Don't be, I get it. I'd be scared too if our situations were reversed. He pulled her close and she let herself sink into his warmth. But I need you to understand something. You're not a rebound, you're not a placeholder. You're not the person I'm with until I figure out what I really want. You are what I really want. They sat like that for a long time, her head on his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the city in fresh white, making everything look new. March arrived with the promise of spring. Longer days, warmer nights, the world thawing after months of cold. They took a weekend trip to the coast, stayed in a tiny cottage that smelled like salt and old wood. They walked on empty beaches, collected sea glass, and talked about futures that included each other not in vague, hypothetical terms, but in concrete plans and shared dreams. I want to wake up next to you every morning, he told her as they watched the sunset paint the ocean in shades of orange and pink. Not just sometimes, always. Her heart stuttered. Are you asking me to move in with you eventually, when you're ready? I'm just saying. I'm all in. Have been since that coffee shop. Just took me a while to realize it and took you a while to believe it. She turned to face him, this man who'd somehow become her person when she wasn't looking, who'd proven over and over that he wasn't going anywhere, who'd chosen her every single day even when she'd made it hard. I'm all in too, she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. They kissed as the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky above them turning deep purple, stars beginning to emerge like promises written in light. In that moment, everything felt possible, everything felt right. But life has a way of testing even the strongest foundations. 2 weeks later, on an ordinary Thursday that should have been unremarkable, Daniel's phone rang during dinner. His sister, voice tight with panic. Their father had collapsed. Heart attack, hospital, come now. The drive was a blur of streetlights and silence. She held his hand the entire way, thumb tracing circles on his palm, offering what comfort she could through touch alone. At the hospital, fluorescent lights too bright and the smell of antiseptic too strong. They waited. His sister paced. His mother sat stone-faced, hands clasped in prayer or worry or both. She felt suddenly out of place, an intruder in a family crisis, unsure if she belonged in this waiting room during this intimate moment of fear. She started to excuse herself, to give them space, when Daniel's mother reached for her hand. Stay, she said simply. Your family too. Those 4 words shifted something fundamental. This wasn't about coffee dates or romantic gestures anymore. This was about showing up when things got hard, about being present in the moments that weren't Instagram-worthy or easy. This was about being woven into the fabric of someone's life so completely that you belonged in the waiting rooms and the difficult conversations and the 3 a.m. phone calls. His father survived, needed surgery and lifestyle changes and careful monitoring, but he survived. And through it all, she stayed, brought coffee and coordinated with doctors and sat with Daniel in quiet moments when words felt insufficient, just being there as an anchor in the storm. One night, after his father had been moved out of ICU, they sat in Daniel's car in the hospital parking lot. Dawn was breaking, painting everything in soft gold. Thank you, he said, voice rough with exhaustion and emotion, for being here, for not running when things got scary. Where else would I be? She asked, and realized she meant it. This was no longer about whether she was a rebound or if his feelings were real. This was about the life they were building together, brick by brick, moment by moment, through coffee shops and snowstorms and hospital waiting rooms. This was about choosing each other, not just in the easy moments but in the hard ones too. He turned to her, eyes red-rimmed but clear, and said words that would change everything. Retry T. I want to marry you someday, he said. The words tumbling out raw and unpolished, stripped of any carefully planned moment or perfect setting. I know it's too soon to say that. I know we haven't talked about timelines or any of that practical stuff, but sitting here, after almost losing my dad, all I can think about is how short life is and how sure I am about you, about us. She stared at him, the sunrise painting half his face in gold, the other half still in shadow. Her heart hammered against her ribs like it was trying to escape her chest. This wasn't a proposal, not exactly, but it was a declaration that carried the same weight, a promise wrapped in possibility. Someday, she echoed, testing the word on her tongue. I'd like that. Someday. They sat in that parking lot until full morning arrived, until the world around them woke up and the moment crystallized into something they could carry forward. Not an engagement, but an understanding. Not a destination, but a direction they'd chosen together. April bloomed with ruthless beauty. Cherry blossoms exploded across the city in clouds of pink and white, petals falling like benedictions on sidewalks and cars and the heads of people rushing to work. She started keeping a toothbrush at his place. He cleared drawer space for her clothes. They began using we instead of I when making plans, their lives intertwining so gradually that she couldn't pinpoint exactly when his apartment started feeling like home. But growth isn't always comfortable, and merging lives means confronting differences that seem small until suddenly they're not. It started with something trivial. A Friday night, both exhausted from long work weeks, trying to decide on dinner. He wanted to order in and watch a movie. She'd been cooped up all week and desperately needed to get out, to feel like she was living rather than just surviving. "We always do what you want," she said, and immediately regretted it because it wasn't true. Not really, but frustration had a way of making small grievances feel monumental. His face shifted, surprise giving way to hurt. "That's not fair. Last week we went to that gallery you wanted to see even though I had a deadline. One time, you did something I wanted one time in the last month. Because you never say what you want. You always say you're fine with whatever. And then later I find out you weren't fine at all." The argument escalated in that particular way first fights do, both of them uncovering resentments they didn't know they'd been harboring. She accused him of being complacent. He accused her of being passive-aggressive. They said things they didn't mean and things they did, and by the end of it, they were both crying in his kitchen, exhausted and raw and wondering how they'd gotten here. She left that night, went back to her own apartment, the one she'd been slowly abandoning, and lay in her own bed that suddenly felt too big and too empty. Her phone buzzed with a text from him. "I'm sorry. Can we talk about this tomorrow when we've both had some sleep?" She typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on, "Yeah, tomorrow." Sleep didn't come easy. She stared at the ceiling, replaying the fight, dissecting each harsh word in defensive response. This was the test she'd been waiting for, wasn't it? The moment when the honeymoon phase ended and real life began, complete with its disappointments and incompatibilities and the grinding work of actually building something lasting. The question was, did she want to do that work? Morning arrived gray and uncertain. They met at the coffee shop where it all began, a choice that felt both fitting and painfully symbolic. He looked as tired as she felt, dark circles under his eyes, hair uncombed, wearing the vulnerability of someone who'd spent the night examining their own faults. "I don't want to lose you over takeout menus," he said as they sat down. Despite everything, she almost smiled. "It wasn't really about the food, I know." He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup like he needed the warmth. "You're right. I have been complacent, comfortable. I got so used to you always being understanding that I stopped checking in. Stopped making sure you were actually happy and not just pretending to be." She wanted to argue, to take some of the blame, but he continued, "And you're right about something else too. You do have trouble asking for what you want. You've spent so long expecting to be disappointed that you don't even let yourself want things anymore. You just ... adapt, go along. Make yourself smaller so you won't be too much trouble." The accuracy of this observation stung. She looked down at her own coffee, watching steam rise and dissipate. "I don't know how to be any different," she admitted quietly. "Then we figure it out together. You practice asking, I practice paying attention. We mess up and we talk about it and we try again." He reached across the table, palm up an invitation. "That's what this is, right? Learning how to be us, not just two separate people sharing space." She placed her hand in his, felt the familiar calluses on his fingers, the warmth of his skin against hers. "I want to try," she said. "I want to figure this out." They spent the rest of that morning talking through everything, expectations and communication styles and all the unsexy logistics of merging lives. They made promises about honesty and effort and not letting resentments fester. It wasn't romantic or cinematic, but it was real, and maybe that mattered more. The weeks that followed were different, more intentional. She practiced voicing preferences, even small ones, even when her instinct was to defer. He practiced asking questions instead of assuming. They stumbled, backslid, had smaller versions of the same argument, but each time they got a little better at finding their way back to each other. May brought warmer weather and an unexpected phone call. Her company was offering her a promotion, a significant one, with a salary increase and responsibilities that would challenge her in all the right ways. The catch, it required relocating to their Seattle office, 6 months minimum, possibly longer. She sat in her boss's office, nodding and smiling and saying she'd need time to think about it, while her mind raced through implications. This was the opportunity she'd been working toward for years. The validation that her work mattered, that she was valued, that she was capable of more than she'd allowed herself to believe. But it meant leaving. Leaving the city, leaving her life here, leaving Daniel just when they'd finally figured out how to fight and make up and be honest with each other. She told him that evening over dinner at his place, watched his face carefully as she explained the opportunity, the timeline, the impossible choice ahead of her. He was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then, "You should take it, just like that. You don't want to discuss it." "What's to discuss? This is huge for you. This is everything you've been working for." His voice was steady, but she could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands gripped his fork a little too tightly. "It's 6 months, Daniel. Maybe more. That's not nothing. Seattle's a few hours by plane. We'd make it work." But would they? She'd seen long-distance break stronger relationships than theirs. The resentment that builds from missed moments and pixelated video calls and always being the one who has to leave. She'd seen how distance creates space for doubt to creep in, for old fears to resurface, for people to grow apart while convincing themselves they're growing together. "You're doing it again," he said softly. "Doing what? Making yourself smaller, assuming you have to choose between your dreams and me. Why can't you have both? Because geography exists. Because I can't be in two places at once. He set down his fork, reached for her hand. Then we figure it out. 6 months isn't forever. And if it turns into more, if you love it there and want to stay, then we talk about what that means. Maybe I find remote work. Maybe I move. Maybe we decide the distance is temporary and we're strong enough to handle it. You'd move. For me, the question hung between them, heavy with implications. In all their conversations about the future, they'd always assumed it would happen here, in this city, in his apartment that had become theirs. Why is that surprising? He asked. You think I'm so rooted here that I couldn't imagine building a life somewhere else? With you, she didn't have an answer because the truth was, yes, she had assumed exactly that. Had assumed she'd be the one bending, adjusting, making sacrifices because that's what she'd always done. The idea that he might meet her halfway or more than halfway felt foreign and destabilizing in a way she couldn't quite articulate. I need to think about it, she said finally. Of course, take your time. Just ... Don't make the decision based on fear. Don't say no to something incredible because you're afraid of what it might cost us. But fear was exactly what she felt. Not fear of failure or fear of Seattle or even fear of the promotion itself. Fear that if she took this job, if she proved she was capable and ambitious and willing to prioritize her career, she'd become too much, too demanding, too complicated, that she'd tip the scales and he'd realize she wasn't worth the effort. She spent the weekend alone, deliberately, needing space to think without his steady presence influencing her thoughts. She made lists of pros and cons, called her best friend, who told her she was insane if she didn't take it, called her mother who asked if she loved him, called her sister who reminded her that women have been choosing between career and relationship since the beginning of time and maybe it was about time men did some choosing too. Sunday evening, she stood at her apartment window watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Her phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. I miss you, but I'm glad you're taking time to think. Whatever you decide, I'm here. Such simple words, but they carried the weight of everything they'd built together, the trust, the patience, the willingness to let her figure things out without pressure or manipulation. She realized something then. Standing in that fading light, she'd spent so long protecting herself from being hurt that she'd never learned how to fight for what she wanted. She'd learned to accept, to adapt, to settle for whatever pieces of happiness life offered without asking for more. But Daniel had been showing her, over and over, that asking for more didn't make you selfish or demanding. It made you human. She wanted the job. She wanted the challenge and the growth and the validation, but she also wanted him. Wanted the life they were building, the fights they were learning to have. The future they'd started planning in hospital parking lots and coffee shops. The question wasn't whether she could have both. The question was whether she trusted herself and him enough to try. Monday morning, she walked into her boss's office with her answer. That evening, she drove to Daniel's apartment, her hands shaking slightly on the steering wheel. She'd made her choice, but she still didn't know how he'd really react when theory became reality. He opened the door before she could knock, like he'd been watching for her. His eyes searched her face, trying to read the verdict in her expression. I took the job, she said. Relief and pride flashed across his face, followed quickly by something that looked like grief. I'm so proud of you, he said, and she could hear him meaning it even through the sadness. I leave in 3 weeks. Okay. He pulled her inside, closed the door, wrapped her in his arms. Then we have 3 weeks to figure out how to make this work. She pressed her face against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. This should have felt like an ending, but somehow it felt like a beginning. A different kind of beginning than they'd planned, but a beginning nonetheless. What if it changes us? She whispered. It will change us. Everything changes us. The question is whether we change together or apart. And there it was. The real test. Not whether they could survive distance, but whether they could evolve without growing apart. Whether the foundation they'd built was strong enough to support the weight of separate cities and diverging schedules and all the ways life conspires to pull people in different directions. The 3 weeks dissolved like sugar in water sweetly, inevitably, too fast. They treated each day like borrowed time, knowing the calendar was counting down to something neither wanted to name out loud. They took long walks through neighborhoods they'd never explored, ate at restaurants they'd been meaning to try, stayed up too late talking about everything and nothing, as if conversation could somehow stockpile intimacy for the months ahead. Her apartment became a graveyard of cardboard boxes, her life sorted into categories: ship, store, donate, keep. Daniel helped her pack, wrapping her dishes in newspaper with more care than strictly necessary, as if handling something fragile that extended beyond the physical objects in his hands. You don't have to do this, she said, watching him tape up another box. I can finish on my own. I know I don't have to. He looked up at her and something in his expression made her chest ache. I want to be part of this, even the hard parts. Especially the hard parts. The night before her flight, they didn't sleep. They lay tangled together in his bed, the familiar weight of his arm across her waist, her fingers tracing idle patterns on his chest. Outside, the city hummed its constant urban lullaby, sirens and car horns and the distant rumble of trains carrying people toward their own destinations. 6 months, she said, into the darkness. 6 months, he echoed. We can do 6 months. But neither of them mentioned what happened after 6 months, whether she'd come back or he'd come to her, or they'd find themselves at an impasse with no clear answer. The future stretched ahead of them like fog, present enough to know it existed, too obscure to see clearly. At the airport, they held each other in the departures terminal while travelers rushed past with rolling suitcases and coffee cups and their own urgent timelines. She memorized the feeling of him, the warmth, the solidity, the way he smelled like home even when home was about to be a different city entirely. Call me when you land, he said against her hair. I will, and every day after that, every day, she promised. One more kiss, long and desperate and tinged with a particular ache of voluntary separation. Then she forced herself to pull away, to pick up her carry-on, to walk toward security without looking back because she knew if she did, she might not have the strength to keep walking. Seattle greeted her with rain. Not the dramatic thunderstorms of summer or the peaceful drizzle of romantic movies, but a persistent, gray dampness that seemed to seep into everything. Her corporate apartment was modern and sterile, all sleek lines and neutral colors and nothing that felt like her. She unpacked her suitcase, video called Daniel to show him the space, and tried not to cry when they said goodnight across time zones that suddenly felt like canyons. The first week was survival, learning new systems, meeting her team, navigating an unfamiliar city with maps that never seemed to match reality. She texted Daniel constantly observations about her coworkers, photos of the Space Needle, complaints about Seattle coffee that would never measure up to their coffee shop back home. He responded with encouragement and updates from his own life, trying to bridge the distance with words and emojis and badly formatted selfies. But text messages are poor substitutes for presence. Video calls capture faces but not the feeling of a hand in yours. And slowly, imperceptibly, like water wearing away stone, the distance began to reshape them. It wasn't dramatic. No one cheated or lied or broke promises. It was smaller than that, and somehow worse. It was the missed calls because of meeting schedules that never aligned. The time difference that meant when she was exhausted and needed to talk, he was just sitting down to dinner. The way their daily rhythms stopped syncing, she'd tell a story that required context he didn't have. He'd reference inside jokes with friends she'd never met. They were growing, both of them, exactly as they'd hoped. She was thriving at work, taking on projects that challenged her in ways she'd forgotten were possible. He'd started freelancing on the side, building a portfolio that could eventually support remote work. They were becoming fuller versions of themselves. But fuller doesn't always mean closer. 2 months in, during their nightly video call, she noticed he seemed distracted. His eyes kept drifting off screen, his responses a half-beat too slow. Everything okay? She asked. Yeah, just tired. Long day. But something felt off. A distance that wasn't about geography. She told herself she was being paranoid, that the physical separation was making her imagine emotional separation. She told herself to trust him, trust them, trust the foundation they'd built. The next morning, his afternoon, she tried calling during her lunch break. No answer. She sent a text. Hours passed before he responded. Sorry, phone died. Had a work thing. Reasonable, logical, nothing to worry about. Except worry found her anyway, settling into her chest like a stone. 3 months in, she flew back for a long weekend. The reunion should have been electric port, embraces and breathless, catching up and remembering why they were doing this in the first place. And it was, at first. That initial moment when she saw him waiting at arrivals. The way her body recognized him before her mind fully processed his presence. But back at his apartment, surrounded by spaces that used to be theirs and now felt only his, something was different. Subtle but undeniable. A photograph on his bookshelf, she didn't recognize him, and coworkers at some event, all of them laughing at something she wasn't part of. A new coffee table that replaced the old one without consulting her. Small changes that individually meant nothing but collectively whispered that life had continued without her. They made love that first night with an urgency that felt more like desperation than desire. Afterward, lying in the darkness that used to feel comfortable, the silence stretched too long. Tell me about work, she said, filling the quiet. He did, but his stories were full of names she didn't know, references she didn't understand, a whole ecosystem of daily life she'd been absent from. She told him about Seattle, about projects she was leading and problems she was solving, and watched his eyes glaze slightly with polite interest that never quite reached engagement. This is what they don't tell you about long distance. It's not the big dramatic moments that break you. It's the slow accumulation of experiences you can't share, jokes you weren't there for, changes that happen without witness. It's becoming strangers, gradually. So gradually you don't notice until you're sitting across from someone you love and realizing you don't quite know them anymore. Sunday came too fast. Back at the airport, the goodbye felt heavier than the first one, more weighted with uncertainty, less buoyed by optimism. 3 more months, he said, but it sounded like a question. 3 more months, she agreed, and tried to make it sound like a promise. On the flight back to Seattle, she stared out the window at clouds that looked like mountains. At the distance stretching below her, and miles of earth and water and everything that separated her from him. She thought about the promotion waiting for her because there was another promotion, offered just yesterday, that would extend her time in Seattle indefinitely but come with opportunities she'd be insane to refuse. She hadn't told Daniel yet, hadn't found the right moment during their weekend together, though she knew that was an excuse. The truth was she didn't know what she wanted him to say. Did she want him to tell her to turn it down and come home, to prove his love by asking her to sacrifice her career? Or did she want him to encourage her to take it, to support her dreams even if it meant more distance, more uncertainty, more slow erosion of whatever they'd built? Maybe she was testing him, or maybe she was testing herself. Her phone buzzed with a text as the plane touched down. "Daniel, miss you already. Let's talk tonight." She responded with a heart emoji, a coward's reply that communicated feeling without committing to anything concrete. That night's video call never happened. She told herself she was too tired, too jet-lagged, needed sleep more than conversation. She told herself she'd call tomorrow, that one missed night didn't mean anything. But tomorrow she was busy, and the day after, and suddenly a week had passed with only text messages, brief updates, and hollow check-ins that felt more like obligation than connection. He called her out on it finally, his face on her phone screen looking exhausted and hurt in equal measure. "What's happening here?" he asked. "You've been avoiding me." "I haven't been avoiding you. I've been busy." "Busy? Right." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she recognized as frustration. "Just tell me, are we okay? Are you okay?" And there it was, the question she'd been avoiding asking herself. Was she okay? Was this okay? Were they doing damage in the name of making it work, staying together out of stubbornness rather than actual compatibility? "I got offered another promotion," she said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. His face shifted through several expressions: surprise, pride, confusion, and then something that looked like resignation. "That's amazing. When do you start?" "I haven't accepted it yet. It would mean staying in Seattle long-term, maybe permanently." The silence that followed felt like falling. She watched him processing, watched him realize what she was really saying, that she was considering a future that didn't include coming back, that maybe she'd already made her choice and was just waiting for permission to admit it. "Do you want to stay?" he asked finally, his voice carefully neutral. "I don't know. Maybe. The opportunity here is incredible, Daniel. It's everything I've worked for, then take it, just like that. You don't want to fight for this for us. What do you want me to say?" His voice cracked slightly. "That I can't live without you. That you should give up your dreams and come back here and resent me forever. Is that what would make you happy? I want you to tell me what you want. I want you." The words burst out of him, raw and desperate. "I want you here, with me, building the life we talked about. But I want you to want that too, and I don't think you do anymore. I think maybe you never really did." The accusation hit like a physical blow. "That's not fair, isn't it? You've been pulling away for weeks. Missed calls, short texts, excuses. You came back for a weekend and barely looked at me. And now you're telling me you might stay in Seattle permanently. Like it's a business decision rather than choosing between your career and our relationship. Why does it have to be a choice? Why can't I have both? Because you're in Seattle and I'm here, and one of us has to bend or this doesn't work. And I'm willing to bend. I've been telling you for months I'd move. I'd find remote work. I'd figure it out, but you won't even have the conversation. You just keep pushing forward with your life like I'm an afterthought. You'll fit in when it's convenient." She opened her mouth to argue, to defend herself, but the words wouldn't come because somewhere deep down she knew he was right. She had been pulling away, protecting herself from the inevitable hurt by creating distance before distance was created for her. Old patterns dying hard, old fears whispering that she'd always been too much trouble, that eventually he'd realize she wasn't worth the effort. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Of what?" "That if I choose you, I'll lose myself. That I'll wake up in 5 years wondering who I could have been if I'd been brave enough to choose my career. But I'm also scared that if I choose the job, I'll lose the best thing that ever happened to me and spend the rest of my life wondering if I made a mistake." His expression softened slightly, the anger giving way to something sadder. "So what do we do?" And that was the question, wasn't it? The one they'd been dancing around for months. The one that had no good answer because every choice came with loss. ... Retry TM. The screen went dark. Not from a lost connection, but because he'd ended the call just like that. The silence in her sterile apartment was deafening, broken only by the relentless Seattle rain against the windows. She sat there for a long time, phone clutched in her hand, staring at the blank screen like it might offer answers it didn't have. The weight of the conversation settled over her like wet concrete, heavy, suffocating, hardening into something that couldn't be undone. This was the moment she'd been waiting for since that first coffee shop encounter. The inevitable ending, the confirmation that she'd been right all along, to guard her heart, to never fully believe in forever. He'd finally gotten tired of trying. She'd finally become too much work. Except that's not what happened, was it? She replayed his words in her mind, hearing them differently now, without the defensiveness clouding her perception. He hadn't said he was done. He'd said he wanted her. He hadn't given up. He'd called her out for giving up, for doing exactly what she'd always done, leaving before she could be left, sabotaging something good because she'd convinced herself it couldn't possibly last. The realization hit her like cold water. She was the one creating distance. She was the one avoiding calls and making excuses and treating their relationship like something that would inevitably fail rather than something worth fighting for. She'd been so afraid of being the rebound, of not being enough, of eventually disappointing him, that she'd started fulfilling her own prophecy. Her phone buzzed. A text from her best friend. "How's everything with Daniel?" She stared at the message, and something inside her cracked open. She called instead of texting, and when her friend answered, everything poured out: the promotion, the fear, the fight, the horrible realization that she might be destroying the best thing in her life because she was too scared to believe she deserved it. "So what are you going to do?" her friend asked when she finally stopped talking. "I don't know." "Yes, you do. You're just afraid to admit it. What if I'm wrong? What if I turn down the promotion and move back and then we don't work out anyway? What if I sacrifice everything and it's still not enough? What if you don't and spend the rest of your life wondering what you gave up? There's no safe choice here. There's only which risk you're willing to take." After they hung up, she sat in the darkness of her apartment, rain still falling, city lights blurring through wet windows. She thought about Daniel in that hospital parking lot, exhausted and vulnerable, telling her he wanted to marry her someday. She thought about the way he'd packed her boxes with gentle hands, the way he'd shown her his text to his ex before sending it, the way he'd never once asked her to be smaller or quieter or less ambitious than she was. She thought about the coffee shop where they'd met, the one she'd been sitting in trying to convince herself she was fine alone, that she didn't need someone to complete her, and she'd been right, she didn't need someone to complete her. But maybe the point wasn't completion. Maybe the point was choosing to build something with another person. Not because you couldn't survive alone, but because surviving wasn't the same as living. The next morning, she called her boss before she could talk herself out of it, asked for a meeting, sat across from him in his corner office with its view of the sound, and said words that terrified her. "I need to talk to you about the promotion." He listened, really listened. And when she finished explaining, not making excuses, just being honest about her life and her priorities and the impossible position she'd put herself in, he didn't look disappointed. He looked thoughtful. "You know," he said, "we're opening a new position back at the main office. Not quite the same role, but similar trajectory, similar pay. It wasn't going to be posted for another month, but if you're interested, I could make some calls." She felt something loosened in her chest. Not relief exactly, but possibility. "I'm interested." "Good, give me a few days." And for what it's worth, anyone who chooses love over ambition isn't weak. They're brave. Career opportunities come around. The right person, that's rarer. She flew back 2 days later. Didn't tell Daniel she was coming because she needed to say this in person. Needed him to see her face when she said it. Needed to do this right for once instead of hiding behind screens and distance. She took a cab straight from the airport to his apartment. It was late afternoon, golden hour painting the city in amber light. She stood outside his door, heart hammering, hand raised to knock. What if he'd changed his mind? What if the fight had been his breaking point? What if she was too late? She knocked anyway. Footsteps. The door opened. Daniel stood there in sweatpants and an old t-shirt, hair messy like he'd been running his hands through it, eyes red-rimmed like he hadn't been sleeping. When he saw her, his expression cycled through shock, confusion, and something that looked dangerously close to hope. "You're here," he said, like he couldn't quite believe it. "I'm here. Can I come in?" He stepped back, wordless, and she entered the apartment that had never stopped feeling like home even when she'd tried to convince herself otherwise. They stood in the living room, 3 feet of space between them that felt like miles. "I'm sorry," they said simultaneously, then both gave watery laughs. "You first," he said. She took a breath, steadied herself. "I'm sorry for pulling away, for protecting myself instead of protecting us, for being so afraid of getting hurt that I started hurting you instead. You were right, I was making all these decisions about my career without including you, treating you like an obstacle instead of a partner." He started to speak, but she held up a hand. "I'm not finished. I talked to my boss. There's a position opening up back here. Same level, same pay. I'm taking it. I'm coming back." His face transformed, relief and joy washing over him like sunrise. But she saw the moment doubt crept in, the question forming before he asked it. "Are you sure? I don't want you to resent me. Don't want you to look back and wonder what you gave up. I'm not giving anything up. I'm choosing something." "There's a difference." She closed the distance between them, took his hands in hers. "For so long I've been afraid that wanting you and wanting my career meant I was greedy, that I couldn't have both without disappointing someone. But you've never made me choose. You've never asked me to be less than I am. The only person making this in either war situation was me. I would have moved," he said quietly. "I've been working on my portfolio. I could freelance from anywhere. I would have come to you. I know, and knowing you'd bend without me even having to ask, that's what made me realize I was being an idiot. Because you've been showing me for months that you're all in. And I've been testing you instead of trusting you." He pulled her close, wrapped his arms around her, and she felt something fundamental settle into place. Not perfect, nothing was ever perfect, but right, chosen, real. "I missed you," he whispered against her hair. "God, I missed you so much. I missed you too. I missed us. They stood like that for a long time, just holding each other, relearning the geography of each other's bodies, the rhythm of shared breathing. Outside, the city moved on without them. Inside, time felt suspended, sacred, a moment carved out from the chaos of logistics and careers and all the practical concerns that would need addressing eventually, but not yet. So what happens now? He asked finally. Now I finish out my notice in Seattle. 2 weeks, then I come home. We figure out the rest as we go. Together, he said, and it wasn't a question. Together, she confirmed. He kissed her then, soft and slow and full of promise. When they pulled apart, both of them were crying, but it was the good kind of tears. The kind that comes from relief and joy and the overwhelming knowledge that you almost lost something precious but somehow, miraculously, got a second chance. That night they lay in his bed, their bed. She corrected herself, talking through logistics, her move back, apartment hunting. Whether they'd get a place together or take it slow. They made plans and revised them and made new ones. The conversation flowing easy now that they'd finally stopped talking past each other. I want you to know something, Daniel said as they were drifting toward sleep. You were never a rebound. From that first conversation in the coffee shop, you were something else. Something more. I just didn't have the words for it yet. She turned to face him in the darkness. What words do you have for it now? Home, he said simply. You feel like home. You always have. Her throat tightened with emotion. You too. Even when I was running away from it, even when I was scared, you always felt like home. The 2 weeks in Seattle passed in a blur of packing and exit interviews and goodbye dinners with colleagues she'd grown to like. But this time the packing felt different. Not like closing a chapter, but like completing a journey. She'd gone to Seattle uncertain and afraid, still seeing herself as someone who had to settle for whatever pieces of happiness came her way. She was leaving confident and clear. Someone who'd learned she could thrive professionally without sacrificing personal joy. Someone who'd finally understood that asking for what you want isn't selfish, it's necessary. Daniel flew out to help her move back, and they spent her last night in Seattle walking along the waterfront as the sun set over Puget Sound. The city was beautiful. In that moment, all pink sky and reflected light, and she felt a surprising fondness for this place that had challenged her and changed her. Any regrets? He asked. She thought about it honestly. No, I needed this, needed to prove to myself that I could do it, that I was capable of more than I believed. I never doubted it. I know, but I needed to not doubt it too. They flew back together, sat side by side on the plane holding hands, and when they landed, when she stepped out into the familiar airport she'd left from months ago, it felt like breathing after being underwater. Like coming back to herself. The apartment they found together was smaller than either of their old places, with quirky angles and pipes that clanged and neighbors who played music too loud. It was perfect. They painted the bedroom a soft blue, argued good-naturedly about furniture placement, created rhythms and routines that were theirs alone. Sunday morning farmers markets, Wednesday night cooking experiments. The way they'd both reach for each other and sleep, unconscious anchoring. Work was good, challenging in the right ways, demanding without being consuming. She came home energized rather than depleted, excited to tell Daniel about her day, eager to hear about his. They fought sometimes, still learning each other's edges and boundaries, but they'd gotten better at it, better at speaking up before resentment built, better at listening instead of defending, better at remembering they were on the same team even when they disagreed. 6 months after she'd returned, on an unremarkable Tuesday evening while they were washing dishes together, Daniel suddenly went quiet. Retry tea. She noticed him staring out the kitchen window, dish towel hanging forgotten in his hand, a strange expression on his face that she couldn't quite read. Not sad, exactly, more like someone standing at the edge of something vast and making a decision about whether to jump. What's wrong? She asked, setting down the plate she'd been rinsing. He turned to her, and she saw it then, not worry or doubt, but certainty. The kind that feels both terrifying and inevitable, like watching dawn break and knowing you can't stop the sun from rising. Nothing's wrong, he said quietly. Everything's actually really right. And I think I've been waiting for the perfect moment to do this, but I'm starting to realize there is no perfect moment. There's just now. Her heart started beating faster. She watched as he dried his hands, as he crossed the small kitchen to where she stood, as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box that looked worn around the edges, like he'd been carrying it for a while. He didn't get down on one knee. They weren't those people, and he knew that. Instead, he took both her hands in his, the box resting between their palms, and looked at her with eyes that held everything they'd been through: coffee shops and hospital waiting rooms, arguments in airports, distance and homecoming. I bought this 2 months after you came back from Seattle, he said. I kept waiting for the right moment, a perfect sunset or a fancy restaurant or some grand gesture that would make a good story. But the truth is, every moment with you feels right. Washing dishes, arguing about whose turn it is to take out the trash, waking up next to you on random Wednesdays. Those are the moments that matter. Tears were already streaming down her face. She couldn't have stopped them if she tried. You thought you were just a rebound, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. Someone I'd move on from when I figured out what I really wanted. But you were never temporary. You were never a placeholder. From the moment I met you, even when I was too scared to admit it, even when you were too scared to believe it too, were always the destination. He opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple and beautiful, exactly what she would have chosen if she'd been asked. So I'm asking you now, not in some perfect moment, but in this real one, surrounded by dirty dishes and the life we've built together, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that you were never too much, never a backup plan, never anything but exactly who I wanted to find? She couldn't speak, could barely breathe. All the fear she'd carried for so long that she was temporary, that love was something that happened to other people, that happiness was something she could borrow but never keep all of it, dissolved in the face of this man asking her to stay forever. Yes, she whispered, then louder, through tears and laughter. Yes, yes, of course, yes. He slipped the ring on her finger with shaking hands, and then they were kissing and crying and holding each other in their small kitchen while the forgotten dishes sat in the sink, and the world outside continued on without them. In that moment, nothing else mattered, not careers or distance or all the obstacles they'd overcome. Just this, just them, just the choice to keep choosing each other, every day, for the rest of their lives. The wedding was small, a courthouse ceremony followed by dinner with family and close friends at a restaurant that wasn't fancy but felt like them. She wore a simple white dress. He wore a suit that was slightly too tight in the shoulders because he'd stress-eaten for a week leading up to the wedding. Her best friend cried through the entire ceremony. His sister gave a toast that was equal parts heartfelt and embarrassing, complete with stories from his awkward teenage years. But the moment she remembered most clearly was standing across from him, hands clasped, repeating vows they'd written themselves. Words about choosing each other on hard days, about fighting fair and loving fiercely, about building a life that honored both their dreams without sacrificing either, about never letting fear win again. When the officiant pronounced them married, when Daniel kissed her with tears streaming down his face, when everyone cheered and threw rice that got stuck in her hair, she felt something shift, not in him, not in their relationship, but in herself. The final piece of that scared, guarded woman who'd sat in a coffee shop expecting disappointment finally let go. She was enough. She'd always been enough. It had just taken finding someone who saw that clearly to help her see it too. They didn't have a honeymoon, not right away. Money was tight, and work was busy, and somehow it didn't matter. Every morning waking up next to him felt like a honeymoon. Every dinner they cooked together, every argument they worked through, every mundane moment of shared life felt like a gift she'd once been too afraid to accept. A year into their marriage, her company offered her a director position. This time she didn't hesitate. She talked to Daniel first. They discussed what it would mean: longer hours, more travel, greater responsibility. He encouraged her without reservation, proud of her success rather than threatened by it. And when she got home late from meetings, when she was stressed and overwhelmed, he was there, not fixing it, just being there, steady, present, her partner in the truest sense. He landed a major freelance contract, to the kind that validated all the years of side hustling and portfolio building they celebrated together, to people who'd learned that success didn't have to be a competition or a compromise. You could cheer for someone else's wins and chase your own at the same time. They talked about kids sometimes, not with urgency, but with the casual certainty of people who knew they had time. Maybe in a few years, maybe 2, maybe 3, they'd figure it out together, the way they figured out everything, with honesty and patience and the understanding that plans could change, and that was okay. On their second anniversary, they went back to the coffee shop where it all began. It had changed owners, updated its decor, but the bones of it remained the same. They ordered lattes and sat at a table by the window, rain streaking down the glass just like that first day, and marveled at how much had changed since two strangers accidentally made eye contact across a crowded room. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't met?" she asked, watching raindrops race each other down the window. "No," he said simply, "because I don't think there's a version of this timeline where we don't meet. Maybe it would have been different coffee shop, different day, but I think we would have found each other eventually. Some things are just meant to happen." She used to hate that kind of thinking, used to believe that fate was just an excuse people used to avoid taking responsibility for their choices, but now she understood it differently. It wasn't that the universe had conspired to bring them together. It was that when the opportunity came, when the moment arrived, they'd both been brave enough to say yes, to risk disappointment, to choose hope over fear. "I'm glad I was sitting here that day," she said, "even though I was heartbroken and convinced I was done with relationships and probably looked like a mess." "You looked beautiful," he said. "Sad, but beautiful. I remember thinking you looked like someone who needed to laugh. I wanted to make you laugh. You did eventually." They sat in comfortable silence, drinking overpriced lattes that still weren't as good as the old place used to make them, watching the rain fall and the world go by. Somewhere in this city, someone else was probably sitting alone in a coffee shop, nursing a broken heart, wondering if they'd ever find something real. Somewhere else, two people were having their first conversation, not knowing yet that this was the beginning of everything. Life wasn't a fairy tale. There was no happily ever after. Just the ongoing work of choosing happiness over and over again, choosing to communicate instead of assuming, choosing to forgive instead of holding grudges, choosing to believe that love wasn't something that happened to you but something you built, carefully and deliberately, with another person who was willing to do the same work. She reached across the table and took Daniel's hand, felt the familiar warmth of his skin, the weight of the wedding band on his finger that matched hers. "Thank you," she said. "For what? For not giving up when I was pulling away. For seeing something in me I couldn't see in myself. For being patient while I learned how to trust this." He squeezed her hand, smiled that same genuine smile that had first caught her attention all those years ago. "Thank you for coming back, for choosing this, for choosing us." Outside, the rain began to slow, sunlight breaking through clouds in shafts of gold that illuminated the wet streets. They finished their coffee, paid their bill, and walked out into the city hand in hand. To people who'd found each other at exactly the wrong time and somehow made it exactly right. Because that's the thing about love that no one tells you when you're young and scared and guarding your heart like a fortress. It's not about perfect timing or flawless people or relationships that never face obstacles. It's about finding someone willing to navigate the obstacles with you. Someone who sees your mess and doesn't run. Someone who gives you space to grow without letting go. She thought she was just a rebound, a temporary stop on someone else's journey to finding something real. But she'd been wrong about so many things back then. Wrong about what she deserved. Wrong about what was possible. Wrong about the difference between settling and choosing. He gave her forever, but more than that, he gave her permission to believe she was worthy of forever. And in return she gave him the same. Sometimes the best love stories aren't about two perfect people finding each other at the perfect time. Sometimes they're about two imperfect people deciding that the timing doesn't have to be perfect if the commitment is real. That you can be scared and brave at the same time. That happily ever after isn't a destination but a choice you make every single day. Years from now, when they're old and gray and sitting on some porch watching sunsets they've seen together 1,000 times before, they'll look back on this chapter of their lives and marvel at how close they came to missing each other. How easy it would have been to let fear win. How different everything would be if even one small thing had changed. But it didn't change. They met, they chose each other. They kept choosing each other through distance and doubt and all the ways life tries to pull people apart. And that, in the end, made all the difference. Because she wasn't just a rebound, she was his forever. And he was hers. Not because it was easy or fated or written in the stars, but because when it mattered most, when everything was on the line, and fear whispered that it wasn't worth the risk, they both decided love was worth fighting for. And it was. It always had been. Retry